Thank you very much for this possibility, and thank you very much for this introduction, which is very helpful in our conversation. I think I will speak now, concentrate only just the North African countries, but I'm ready to talk also about the other countries later in the discussion. What we heard in this, also in these revolutions, is two words which we heard also in '89: freedom and bread. There was no Islamistic flag there. There was no anti-Israeli flag there. That was all not the issues. And there was a lot of openness, and especially in Egypt and Tunisia, it were young, well-educated people without any professional perspective. And the modern instrument, like the internet and the Twitter, were the most important revolutionary weapons. But if that's the case, then we have always to see that freedom and bread belongs together. We have to be helpful that a peaceful transformation can happen towards a more democratic system. But on the other side, such a moderate development is only possible if there can be delivered bread, economic and social perspectives. If that is not delivered, then it goes in a totally wrong direction. We have to take this positive. We can have something like '89, or we get '79 in Iran. And therefore, we have to see that the situation in countries are different. I think, and I was 3 weeks ago in Rabat in Morocco, I think there is a chance, and we explained it, a chance that from the top a reform can take place, which might have a chance to have a peaceful transformation. I do not know, but so far I know, and what I know about the king, I think they have understood what is needed, and they're hopeful it can be carried through, and it will satisfy the people. In Tunisia, I'm relatively optimistic because Tunisia has a middle class, which is an important point for moderate developments and where you can build on. Libya, I think it's a country which is totally different again, because with the exception of the Gaddafi time, this was never a centralized governed country. It's a tribal country which had a Senussi king on top of it to have a certain balance, but it was never run from the top. And we believe now and make the same mistakes as we did in Afghanistan under certain different circumstances to democratize a country with centralized methods in a decentralized country by heart. It will go totally wrong. Therefore, I have to take this into account. I believe since a few days, it's my feeling that it was in the right direction, what means that Gaddafi will leave at the end of the day. But then we have to do it in that way that the leaders of the revolution in Benghazi, which is always the part where the Senussis came from and the kings came from, is not use that as a chance to come back to the centralized Gaddafi role. Then you have a civil war. So to moderate them, that they respect the different type of country there. Egypt again is quite different because highly populated, a lot of social unrest and religious problems. People forget that, for example, the Coptic Christians, we say we were there before the others were there, and they have still between 15 and 20% of the population. And therefore you have a total different setting there. And here I think it's an important point that we have at the moment two organized groups. These are the people around the army and the Muslim Brotherhood, which is not like the Iranian Khomeini type of people. But nevertheless, they were Mubarak's loyal opposition and are well prepared with organized on the grassroots. Here we come to a decisive decision in the next days. First elections or first constitution. If they want to do the elections in that interpretation until the 21st of September, then other possible democratic parties have no chance. We will have in a little bit more than 1 week's time, or 2 weeks' time, the Ramadan for 6 weeks. How then any of parties could be prepared in program, in organization, in grassroots for an election campaign for the last 2-3 weeks left? If the decision is taken for the 21st, it might be a setting up by the army and the Muslim Brotherhood who run the country. The Muslim Brotherhood is very much lobbying for that, and it looks so that they had the last day the first success, because the responsible minister for the first time said elections first, what I heard just this morning. And because if they do the constitution afterwards, where they are the biggest party in the government, in the parliament does this constitution that way, then you will have the situation which will make it more difficult than until now. Already now in the constitution, it's a Muslim country, constitution, but certain rights for the others. The Coptic Christians played an important role traditionally. Boutros Ghali, the former United Nations Secretary General, was a Christian. Many people do not remember. And if that is then used by the Muslim Brotherhood via the constitution and their stronger role, because the others had no chance to prepare for that, then you will have, I think, a negative development, which would have also an impact on foreign policy, a peace agreement with Israel and all that. But it's anyway a problem, was, I think, also with other solutions, I fear. And so therefore this is a decisive point. The other point is, I will go now with the EPP President Martens in 10 days' time to Cairo, talk to different parties. That we have to find a way, as we did it in the 70s in Portugal and in Spain, and after 89 in Central and Eastern Europe. How can we be helpful via our foundations to set up parties, not to set up parties, to help parties to organize themselves in the sense of program and grassroots and election campaigns? That needs time, and I think sometimes is already lost because of a lot of reasons. This, I think, it's a decisive point. The other point is the long-term question, to bring this economic and social background to that. We have to change our neighborhood policy. Money is enough there. We have an annual European budget for the moment for around 7 billion euros for neighborhood and partnership policy for the Northern African countries. We have in the Instrument for Democracy and Human Rights around 1.1 billion euros in that special program of 2007-2013, and in the Instrument for Stability 2.1 billion euros. It's a lot of money, which is mostly used for Northern Africa as it can be used for Northern Africa. So the money is not the most important point. The money is how this money can meet the right structures. And this means partly for building up these parties. We're on our way in Brussels, together with the Commission and foundations, political foundations, to set up such a framework to be helpful. And secondly, we want to give a perspective for a better economic and social situation. First of all, we have to make clear that there must be a stronger multilateral approach. Only 15% of trade of these countries is trade between themselves. It's the old classical colonial trade relationship. And at the same time, from Southern European countries, a block in trade because of tomatoes and oranges. Italians and Spanish, and so do not want to open the border. And you have to see, for example, this multilateral approach is not there. The last time the Northern African finance and economy ministers met were 2005. So it's a lot of work to do to give a chance for growth. which is most important, and then use this money also for small and medium-sized companies and so on. But the most important point, that is our lesson we had in Eastern Europe and also myself in Eastern Germany after '89, is to help them so fast as possible in order to create stability both for investment and for the belief in justice, a chance for justice in the population. Good governance, which means mostly good local government, and a judiciary which works. This, I think, is the most important point, where we can give perhaps a hand to our experience and experts to help them to build such structures, because if you build that structures and has a credibility, then private money will flow in for investments. But if that is not the case, people are afraid to lose their money, and I think this might be a picture where we can be helpful that it goes in the right direction. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was a marvelous combination of both the political as well as the economic, and gave us some insights on immediate actions in the immediate future. And finally, our third speaker, Michele, would you give us your perspective, please?
Thank you, Bill, and thanks to IFES for inviting me. I'm going to say a few words about the U.S. perspective on all these changes. So it seems to me, as the United States looks at what's happening in the Arab region now, we have several different kinds of cases. We have the difficult, we have the very difficult, and we have the cases that are easier, or at least I think the United States thinks are easier than the others. So the difficult cases that are difficult but promising in a way are countries in which there has already been some kind of regime change and there's an explicit commitment to democratization, although of course this is not a guarantee of success. And of course I'm speaking here of Tunisia and Egypt, also Iraq. The very difficult cases are the ones in which there's ongoing civil or military conflict over whether or not there will be significant change. Libya, Syria, Yemen. I put Bahrain also into this category, although we don't see conflict in the streets right now. I'm convinced it will be back before long. And then there are the cases that I think the United States views as easy cases for now. Amber said a few words about them. Morocco, Jordan, cases where there is little unrest and the leaders have promised to carry out political reforms. I'll say more about them in a moment. And then there are many other countries in the region that are reacting in various ways to the turmoil, but for now at least have not moved into situations in which major change seems likely, although some of them, there are certainly question marks. Palestine, Algeria, I mean, we could see a lot more activity in some of these countries. In terms of the U.S. handling of the situation, when I speak to people about this, particularly in the Middle East, there's a lot of confusion about U.S. policy on what's going on in the Middle East. I think it's relatively clear what U.S. policy is, but there is a spoken policy and an unspoken policy, and I'm going to convey them as I understand them. Of course, I'm not a U.S. official. I'm just giving my interpretation, and I don't mean to imply that there's anything sinister about there being a spoken and an unspoken policy. It's quite a natural situation. So the spoken policy is that the United States supports the universal human rights of citizens in all Arab countries and opposes the use of force against peaceful demonstrators in all cases. And I think the U.S. administration has been able to be pretty consistent about these two principles, and we hear them articulated over and over again and translated into all these various situations that I've just named have been applied. Those two principles have been applied in one way or another. But then there's the unspoken policies. And I think the most important thing to know here is that the United States is reactive, not proactive, to the changes in the region. The degree of U.S. interest, the degree of U.S. pressure on governments, and the energy with which the United States will pursue those two principles I mentioned is in direct proportion to the intensity of protests in any given country. the United States will only support or advocate leadership changes in countries where the citizens seem to have made their decision in favor of that. And it also helps, of course, if others in the region have made a decision that leadership change is necessary. And I'm referring here, of course, to the case of Libya, in which there was an Arab consensus in favor of that. So I think if you look at it through this lens, if you realize that the U.S. is largely reacting to the degree of protest on the ground in these countries and shaping its policy that way, and also the degree of consensus in the region about the need of change, then it sorts out a lot of what appear to be contradictions in U.S. policies, right? So anyway, that's how I understand it. That's how I understand the guiding principles of what the U.S. administration is doing. Now, what should the U.S. be doing? And I'll make so bold as to venture some thoughts on what Europe should be doing as well. In my view, up to this point, the United States and Europe, as transatlantic partners, have not yet made a compelling response to the changes in the region. I think U.S. and European responses have been quite modest and have been shaped a good deal by our preoccupation with our own problems, particularly financial and economic problems. I don't think it's too late yet for a compelling transatlantic response, but a year from now it probably will be too late. I think this is something we need to get on now. So here's my thought about this, is that we should be making some kind of a compelling offer, focusing initially on the countries that already are on the road to transition. So I'm going to set aside Iraq here. That's a very complicated case, and there already is a great deal of engagement there. But let's talk about Tunisia and Egypt. I think we need to find a way to do what we can, understanding that we're outsiders to these situations. There are limits to what we can do. But there are things that we could do to incentivize the type of democratic transition we would like to see and we would like to support in these countries. In this regard, and Mr. Brok just mentioned this, I think the economic situation is extremely important, and that the economic situation inside these countries can either underpin or undermine the political transitions, right? We've seen this scenario played out over and over again all over the world. This is not a new idea that the economic situation can undermine political transition, particularly in favor of the very high, particularly in view of the very high expectations that Amber mentioned. There are high expectations in these countries for political change and also for a better economic situation. So it seems to me also that we as outsiders, the United States and Europe, have to form entirely new relationships with these countries. Let's face it, I mean, we were supporting authoritarian leaders there. Many of the champions of relations with the United States and Europe were linked to those authoritarian leaders. We're almost starting over again. I mean, thank goodness for the kind of democracy support programs that we all had through our foundations, IFES and others, and the many good European foundations. Because of them, we do have relations with civil society and opposition politicians and so forth. We have something to build on there. But we're starting over again in our relationships with these countries, or at least we're hoping we can start over again in our relationships with these countries. And what I suspect is in this new era, economic tools are going to be the best ones that we have to move these relationships forward, and particularly trade. This is going to be the way. I really think we have to take a deep breath and think about things that are difficult for us to contemplate right now. U.S. free trade agreements with Tunisia and Egypt, some kind of a Euro-Mediterranean economic area, or much liberalized trade with Europe as well. I agree that trade within the region can be important, but I think that's a much longer term prospect, both because the economies are not all that complementary as they are now, and also because we're going to continue to have a patchwork of political arrangements. And, you know, if Egypt and Tunisia are taking off in one direction and Algeria and Morocco in another, and so forth. It's not going to be as easy to get them all cooperating. We'll have to see, but I think that's a longer term thing. I think what we should be looking for is ways in which we can help Egypt and Tunisia, Egypt in particular, because it's so much larger and a much larger economy than Tunisia's, become a hub of trade between the United States, Europe, Africa, the Middle East. Egypt in particular is perfectly situated geographically to do this. We need to kind of sketch out a vision for these countries of where they can go in their relationships with us and in terms of their own prosperity. Okay, I don't want to go into too much detail on that. I also think I wanted to